The wedding invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, nestled inside a cream-colored envelope sealed with a gold wax crest. The words were elegant, printed in embossed script. Jennifer, Nathan, June Tress, Whispering Pines Garden Estate. Alice reread it now for the 13th time. She sat alone in the breakfast nook of her house, where morning sunlight spilled over faded tiles and well-loved furniture. The same space where she had once fed her children oatmeal before school, the same spot where her husband Robert used to read the paper with his coffee. Now, she was reading lines about floral arrangements and RSVP cards, wondering how it had all gone so fast. She smoothed a wrinkle in the paper, then looked up at the old grandfather clock. It ticked on stubbornly, a relic Robert had insisted on keeping. He always said it reminded him that time, though predictable, had a will of its own. Alice was 65 now. Her bones ached when it rained. She spoke more softly than she used to. She had learned to live without Robert, though not entirely. There were still days when she found herself reaching for his robe or setting the table with 2 cups out of habit. His scent lingered in the closet, in the pages of the old books on his nightstand. But she was doing all right. She had Michael, her grandson, who came by once a week for tea and brought her small, thoughtful things, a rare vinyl record here, a packet of her favorite mints there. She had Jennifer, her granddaughter, who used to braid her hair as a child and write her sweet notes in crayon. And she had her son, Richard. Though lately he had become distant, practical, a little sharp around the edges. Still, she was happy to help with the wedding. It was her gift. She paid for the venue, the catering, the dress, the flowers, the photographer, the honeymoon soutenirly, everything but the groom. Not that she was keeping score. On the day of the wedding, Alice spent hours preparing. She wore a soft periwinkle dress with embroidered sleeves, the same one she had worn to her niece's graduation. It still fit, mostly. She put on Robert's favorite perfume, lavender and bergamot. Subtle and Warmond curled her hair carefully. As she looked in the mirror, she whispered, "Do I look all right, Robert?" She imagined him saying, "You're the most beautiful woman in the room." It helped. The venue was breathtaking. Whispering Pines lived up to its name, with long rows of trees swaying gently in the breeze, lanterns strung between trunks, and rose petals scattered on winding garden paths. Jennifer looked radiant in lace and satin, her smile luminous as she walked down the aisle. Alice sat in the front row with a heart full of emotion. Michael sat beside her and squeezed her hand. "You okay, Grandma?" "More than okay," she whispered. Proud. The ceremony was flawless. Laughter, vows, kisses, and applause. Then came the reception. That's when everything changed. As guests mingled and champagne flowed, Alice was handed a name tag, a novelty item. It seemed part of some fun idea by the bridal party. Personalized for each guest. She squinted at hers. The old lady who's paying for everything. For a second, she didn't react. Maybe it was a mistake. A bad joke. But as she looked up, she noticed the stifled chuckles. Some guests looked away. Others raised eyebrows in amused surprise. Her cheeks flushed. Her hands went cold. She gently placed the name tag on the table and stood up. Later, she overheard the laughter. Richard, holding a glass of scotch, speaking to someone near the dessert table. "Mom, she doesn't care. She's always happy to pay. Makes her feel needed." Pamela chimed in, sipping her wine. "At least the tag's honest. She did pay for everything." They laughed again. Alice turned away. Her chest felt tight, but not with sadness. Something deeper. Humiliation. It gnawed at her ribs like a slow, bitter acid. That night, she returned home alone. She poured herself a glass of water, left it untouched, and sat on the patio in silence. The moon was full, but it gave no comfort. Her thoughts churned. Around midnight, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her sit up straight. Martin Reynolds, attorney at law. "Robert Slavier." "Alice," he said gently. "There's something I've been instructed to give you, should certain events occur. She met him the next morning in his office. He handed her an envelope. It was old, sealed with Robert's signet. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax and unfolded the paper inside. Addendum to Will, Personal Clause Number 12. If at any time after my passing, any descendant of mine publicly ridicules, shames, or humiliates my wife Alice, they are to be immediately removed from my estate's list of beneficiaries. Alice didn't speak for a long while. Martin waited patiently. When she looked up, her voice was calm. I won't act yet. I want to see what they do next. He nodded. As you wish. That night, Alice began digging. Into old check stubs, bank statements, receipts. The numbers told a different kind of story. 3 years. Over $250,000. Renovations. Vehicles. Vacations. School fees. A wedding. And through it all, her name signed at the bottom. By dawn, Alice made herself a fresh pot of tea. This time, she didn't make 2 cups. She sipped slowly, and for the first time in years, she began to question what love had cost Harrand, what it might finally be worth to take it back. In the days following the wedding, Alice avoided calls. Pamela left 2 voicemails, both cheerful, both insincere. One thanking her again for all the support. The other gently asking whether Alice could chip in just a bit more. For Jennifer's honeymoon fund. Something about a last-minute villa upgrade in Santorini. Alice didn't respond. Her silence wasn't deliberate. Not at first. But every time she reached for the phone, her fingers froze. She kept seeing the name tag, kept hearing the laughter. That single phrase, the old lady who's paying for everything, had settled deep in her ribs like splinters. It wasn't just a joke. It was a label. One that had been brewing quietly for years. She wandered her home as if it were unfamiliar, eyes catching on framed photos of Jennifer's childhood, Michael's graduation, even Richard and Pamela's 20th anniversary dinner. So many milestones. So many checks written. She found herself standing at the cabinet that held her financial files. And without knowing exactly why, she opened the drawers. Stacks of folders. Wedding invoices. Car transfers. Home renovation estimates. Tuition receipts. She pulled out the calculator. 3 hours later, Alice sat still in her kitchen, the silence sharp. Lambai wushisi. Ling. That's how much she had given to her family since Robert's funeral. In just 3 years. She blinked. Not out of disbelief, she knew she had always said yes, but out of shame. Not theirs. Her own. The next day, Michael dropped by. The only one who hadn't called asking for anything. Hey, Grandma. Just checking in. You okay? Alice hesitated. Then nodded. You didn't laugh. At the wedding. It looked confused. Laugh? At what? My name tag? The joke. Michael frowned. I didn't see the tag. I was with you during most of the reception, remember? What did it say? She told him. Silent. Jesus, he muttered. They really put that on your chest? She nodded, lips tight. Michael's jaw clenched. I heard them talking afterward. Dad and Pamela. They think you're just some kind of walking bank account. He sat down across from her. And that's not all. They're talking about downsizing you. Putting you in a retirement place. Selling the house. Said it'd be more efficient. Now that you're older. Alice stared at him. Efficient, she echoed, like tasting something bitter. That evening, Richard came over unannounced. Alice opened the door, unsurprised. We need to talk, he said. You've been ignoring Pamela's calls, and Jennifer needs help with the honeymoon. She stepped aside. Come in. He strode in like he owned the place. Her place. Mom, we know things have been tough on you since Dad passed. That's why we've taken care of things, made decisions on your behalf. But you're not getting any younger. He folded his arms. Pam and I think it's time you moved into something more manageable. You'd be safer. Less responsibility. You don't need this big old house. Alice looked at the hardwood floors. At the beams Robert had sanded himself. At the garden she'd planted, season after season. She turned to face her son. "You mean it's time for you to manage my things?" Richard waved a hand. "Don't be like that. It's logical. The money you'd get from selling this place could help fund Jennifer's future. Or Michael's. This house is dead space." "No," Alice said softly. "This house is my life." He scoffed. "You're being emotional." She nodded slowly. "Yes, and now I'm done being only emotional." She walked to the bookshelf, pulled a folder from the bottom drawer, and handed it to him. He flipped it open. "What is this?" "It's what I've spent on this family since your father died." He blinked. 250. $4,612, she finished for him. "That's not counting groceries. Or birthdays. Or your daughter's wedding, where I was publicly ridiculed." Richard's ears turned red. "It was just a joke. You're blowing this out of proportion." "That's the problem," she said quietly. "You all think it's a joke. My worth. My place. My money." He left soon after. Angry. Flustered. Without her permission to do anything. That night, Alice lit a candle and opened Robert's letter again. "Any descendant who humiliates Alice shall forfeit their inheritance." She folded the page gently. Not to use it yet. Number. But now, she had witnesses. She had proof. And she had something even stronger than that. A sense that she deserved better. For 2 weeks, Alice said nothing. She answered no calls, made no offers, and ignored Pamela's repeated texts, asking if she had a moment to chat about Jennifer's honeymoon registry. She didn't check in with Richard. She didn't ask Michael to visit. Instead, she sat with herself. She sorted through old letters, lined up photo albums by year. She finally took down the Christmas wreath from the guest room door. She moved slowly, but she moved with intent. The woman who used to respond to everything immediately had vanished. In her place stood someone who watched, who measured, and who waited. One afternoon, Alice took the car out of the garage the first time in months. She drove herself to Martin Reynolds' office in a quiet part of town. The old law firm building still smelled like leather and tax forms. Martin greeted her like a daughter. "I had a feeling you'd come in." "I need to know exactly what Robert left," Alice said, settling into the chair. "Not just what I've been living on, the whole picture." He opened a file drawer, pulled out a thick brown folder, and placed it gently in front of her. "He never wanted you to worry about numbers. But he planned for everything." Over the next hour, Martin laid it all out, 2 fully paid, for properties, diversified investments, untouched retirement accounts, multiple trust funds all arranged with Alice's name in first position. The monthly allowance she'd been living on? Only a sliver. She stared at the figures. "I didn't know we had this much." Martin smiled. Robert did. That's why he structured it so carefully. He paused. "Alice, you don't have to ask anyone for anything. Not ever again." That night, Alice slept more soundly than she had in years. She dreamed of Robert not in a hospital bed this time, but sitting beside her on the porch, sipping coffee, smiling. In the dream, he didn't say anything, but his hand covered hers. The next day, Alice walked to her mailbox. Inside was a white envelope with cursive lettering. Roberta 66th birthday brunch. A brunch. At Richard and Pamela's house. Alice read it twice. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of recent events. Just a time, date, and a little postscript in Pamela's handwriting. "We'll also go over the house plan then." Ah, there it was. She debated attending. Part of her wanted to skip it, but something deeper, a thread of strategy, perhaps told her it was time to let the curtain fall. To stop pretending the show must go on. That Sunday, Alice wore navy blue slacks and a pearl brooch Robert had given her on their 25th anniversary. She arrived 5 minutes late. Richard looked mildly annoyed. Pamela greeted her with exaggerated warmth. "Alice, so glad you made it. We're just about to serve mimosas." The table was set for 8. Jennifer wasn't there. Michael was. Pamela handed her a menu. We thought it'd be fun to do a buffet-style brunch. Oh, and afterward, Richard will walk you through the assisted living community options. Michael nearly choked on his juice. Alice smiled. Let's eat first, shall we? Midway through the meal, Richard stood up. Before dessert, there's one more gift. Pam and I have been speaking with a legal advisor. Alice tilted her head. About what? Well, he said, clearing his throat. About gaining legal power of attorney for your estate. Just for the practical stuff, banking, taxes, things like that. You're not getting any younger and… Michael interrupted. Are you serious right now? Richard ignored him. We thought today would be the perfect day to formalize it. Pam has the forms. Pamela pulled out a manila folder. And then Alice stood. Martin? She called. From the hallway, Martin Reynolds entered the room, briefcase in hand. Pamela's face drained of color. Richard froze. You brought your lawyer? Indeed, Martin said. And I have something to read aloud. Per Robert Everly's codicil clause, he unfolded a paper. If any descendant publicly humiliates Alice Everly, they forfeit all claims to inheritance or estate control. Dead silence. This clause was triggered on the 3rd of June, at Jennifer's wedding reception, when Richard and Pamela Everly approved the distribution of a name tag labeling Mrs. Everly as the old lady who's paying for everything. Pamela's mouth opened, then shut. It was a joke. You're on video, Martin said calmly. Multiple angles. This is insane, Richard said. You're overreacting, Mom. No, Alice said, voice steady. I've been underreacting for decades. This is correction. Michael stood beside her. You always treated her like a credit card. You didn't even try to hide it anymore. Alice turned to her son. I'm not selling my house. I'm not signing your forms. And I'm not explaining myself again. She looked at Michael. Shall we go? He nodded. Pamela stumbled forward. Wait, what about Jennifer? She didn't do anything. Alice stopped in the doorway. Jennifer will inherit something far greater. The truth. And perhaps, in time, a relationship based on love and not leverage. Then she left. That night, Alice walked barefoot in her garden. She clipped roses, hummed an old melody Robert used to whistle, lit a citronella candle. For the first time in a long while, the world was quiet, and the curtain had finally dropped on the lie she'd lived inside for far too long. The following morning, Alice found herself walking through Robert's study for the first time in months. Dust shimmered in morning light across the bookshelves, and the air still smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. She sat down at his desk and ran her fingers across the wood. It still bore the small nick where he had once slammed it with a stapler during tax season. The room had been untouched, almost sacred, since his passing. But today it felt like she had permission to step inside again, not as a grieving widow, but as a woman reclaiming space that was always half hers. She pulled out the key she had carried in her wallet for years, the small brass one with the green ribbon. It opened the bottom drawer. Inside, a weathered journal, wrapped in wax paper. A post. It on the cover in Robert's familiar, precise handwriting. For Alice, if you ever doubt your strength. The entries began 5 years before his death. Observations, reflections, sketches of ideas. But most of all, the journal told the story of a man who had watched his wife give everything and worry she was never enough. She thinks being kind is her only superpower. But it's also what makes her vulnerable. I worry they'll bleed her dry when I'm gone. Alice read through tears. I've drafted the codicil to protect her. It's a fail-safe. She won't like it. She'll probably never use it. But if they ever humiliate her, if they forget who she is, this clause will remind them. At the bottom of the last page, dated just weeks before he passed, Robert had written, My love, I know you'll hesitate. You'll think forgiveness is the nobler road. But self-preservation is not cruelty. It is clarity. And you deserve to live with your chin high and your heart unchained. Alice closed the book. That afternoon, she met Michael at his favorite cafe. The place smelled of coffee grounds and paperback glue, and he already had a seat saved with 2 croissants and chamomile tea. "You okay, Grandma?" "I am," she said, setting the journal between them. "I wanted you to see this." She let him read it. He didn't speak for a while after. Finally, he looked up, jaw tight. "He saw it all coming, didn't he?" "Yes," Alice said. "But he also believed in me finding my voice, eventually." "Well, you have," Michael said. Loud and clear. They sat together not in silence but in shared understanding. Later that week, Alice called Martin again. "I'd like to restructure my will," she said. "Of course. You want to remove Richard and Pamela entirely?" "Yes. But not out of revenge. Out of logic. They've had more than their fair share. And I want what's left to build something better." She paused. "I want Michael as my executor, and I want to start a trust. Not for college, not for real estate, for something that gives back." Martin smiled on the other end of the line. "Do you have something in mind?" "A bookstore," she said. "His dream. Our dream now." Over the following weeks, Alice began making moves. She joined a local painting class, something she'd put off since before Robert fell ill. She reconnected with Lorraine, her college roommate who now ran an arts co-op. She cleared out half her attic and began donating vintage furniture and clothes to shelters. The home Richard wanted to efficiently repurpose was suddenly brimming with life again. Then came Jennifer. She showed up one quiet afternoon, holding a wrapped box and a tight, uncertain smile. "Can I come in?" Alice hesitated, then opened the door. Jennifer placed the box on the coffee table. "It's for you. For your birthday. I made it myself." Inside was a framed collage. Photos of Alice with Jennifer at every stage of life. Feeding ducks in the park, decorating cupcakes, brushing her hair before dance recitals. I didn't know what happened until after. The name tag. The brunch. "I should have said something." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I was selfish. And I was quiet when I should have stood up." Alice took her granddaughter's hands gently. "Silence is sometimes fear, not malice. I know that now. I want to make it right," Jennifer said. Alice nodded. "Then stay. And build something real with me." They sat down. Talked. For hours. No accusations. Just repair. That night, Alice stood by the window in her bedroom, holding Robert's journal to her chest. His voice echoed again in her memory. "Live with your chin high," she whispered aloud. "I will." Alice had always loved the early morning. The silence. The way light crawled slowly across the floorboards like a shy child entering a room. She stood in the kitchen now, watching the tea kettle steam, feeling a sense of wholeness she hadn't realized she was missing. No more unexpected demands. No more calls loaded with guilt and financial suggestion. Just peace. And possibility. Michael arrived at 9 sharp, holding a folder and 2 cups of coffee. His face was flushed with excitement. "Okay," he said, placing everything on the dining table. "I've got floor plans, renovation estimates, and a few location options." The bookstore project had become their shared mission. They called it Everly Pages, a nod to both their surname and the chapters they were writing together. Alice insisted it include a reading room, a cafe corner, and shelves for secondhand books, the kind that held stories and history. Michael opened his laptop. "I've already reached out to 2 local booksellers about partnerships, and Lorraine said the art co-op would love to host weekend workshops. You could teach painting here." Alice blinked. "Me? Teaching? Why not? You've got more wisdom in your pinky finger than some professors have in a lecture hall." She laughed. It had been a long time since she'd felt this. Energized. Over the following weeks, they met with contractors, visited old storefronts, and negotiated terms. Alice handled finances with a steadiness that surprised even herself. She was no longer the woman who said yes out of habit. She said yes because she had intent. And when she said no, it carried weight. Richard called once. Left a voicemail. "Look, Mom, I know you're upset, but cutting us out of the will? That's extreme. We're family." Alice didn't respond. Pamela, emailed. A single sentence. You've humiliated us. Alice forwarded it to Martin, then deleted the thread. No response was needed. The silence was her answer. The bookstore opened 4 months later. The grand opening wasn't flashy. No streamers. No cameras. Just soft music, warm lighting, and the smell of fresh pages. Friends came. Neighbors wandered in. Lorraine painted a mural on the back wall, a tree with open books for leaves. Children's laughter echoed from the storytelling corner. Jennifer arrived with her baby daughter, Roberta, named after the grandfather she'd never meet, but whose spirit now lived in journals, in values, and in the kind of courage that passed through generations when properly protected. Jennifer hugged Alice tightly. I'm here to help, not to ask. One evening, long after closing, Alice sat alone by the window of Everly Pages. The last light of day melted across the hardwood floor. She thought of the years she'd spent bending over backwards, mistaking guilt for generosity. She now understood. Boundaries weren't walls, they were foundations. And she had rebuilt hers from the ground up. A letter arrived the next morning. Handwritten, no return address. But Alice recognized the penmanship immediately. Richard. Mom, I've spent the last month angry. But underneath it, ashamed. You were right. About all of it. I didn't see you. I only saw what you could give me. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just for you to know I regret it. And I'm trying to be better. Love? Richard. Alice read the letter 3 times, then folded it gently and placed it in the back of Robert's journal, tucked between 2 blank pages. She didn't know if she would respond, but she felt no pain, no burning grief. Just space. That afternoon, Michael brought in a group of high school students for a creative writing club. Alice served tea. She shared her favorite quote from her own notebook. There is nothing braver than a woman who decides she belongs to herself. They clapped, and Alice smiled. The first anniversary of Everly Pages arrived on a warm spring morning. Alice stood in the entryway before the store opened, her hands tucked in the pockets of her floral cardigan, and her eyes scanning the now familiar space with quiet pride. The floors, once bare and dusty, now gleamed with the steps of readers. The bookshelves hummed with life. A small handwritten sign above the doorway read, "Books change hands, stories change hearts." Alice had written it herself. Customers began to trickle in by mid-morning. Jennifer arrived with little Roberta, now babbling and toddling. Michael brewed coffee while 2 children nestled in the story nook with a book about foxes and friendship. The energy was easy, comfortable, real, not forced or performative, like the parties she used to host for Richard and Pamela, the ones where expectations were wrapped in ribbons and costs hidden behind champagne flutes. This was different. Here, love didn't require a receipt. At noon, Lorraine arrived with a small cake lemon poppy seed, Alice's favorite. The frosting was light, topped with blueberries in the shape of an open book. 1 year, Lorraine said, handing her a fork, and still no sign of burnout. Only signs of rebirth, Alice said. They both laughed. The bell above the door jingled. A man in a brown coat stepped inside, shoulders tense. He looked older than she remembered. Richard. Alice met his eyes without surprise. "May I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. She nodded. They sat at the small cafe table near the window. Michael watched from behind the counter, cautious but silent. Richard cleared his throat. "I didn't come to argue, or ask for anything." Alice waited. "I just wanted to say, you were right. About everything. I saw you as an institution, not a person. Like a fixture in our lives that would always provide without cost. That wasn't fair." He hesitated. "Pamela and I, well, we're separated now." Alice raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She couldn't understand why I started refusing help, why I canceled her spa card, or told her I wasn't asking you for money anymore. He looked down. "It's strange. You grow up thinking strength looks like control. Turns out it looks more like what you did, letting go." Alice took a sip of tea. "What happens next is your decision. Not mine. He nodded slowly. I'd like to keep trying. She didn't promise anything. But she didn't push him away either. That evening, as the final customers left and the shop quieted, Alice sat beneath the mural of the tree with book leaves and closed her eyes. In her lap was Robert's journal. In the pocket of her cardigan, a folded piece of blank stationery. She would write her own entry tonight. Not a memory, not a regret, but a beginning. She wrote, I once thought my value came from how much I gave, but now I see it comes from how much I protect. My time, my heart, my story. And today, I protected something beautiful. Not money, not property, but myself. She signed her name and tucked the note in the back of the book, beside Robert's last page. The next morning, Alice walked out onto her porch, sun warm on her skin, the garden blooming in chaotic color. She didn't check her phone. She didn't open her emails. She simply stood barefoot in the earth. She had paid for many things in her life, but her freedom, that she had finally claimed for herself.